Hello, everyone. So, in this lecture, we will learn about metabolism. We will also see what metabolism is, what are the major components of metabolism, and then we'll take a brief overview of all the major pathways of the primary macronutrients that take place inside the living bodies. So, first, let's look at metabolism, that what exactly it is. So, if we talk about metabolism, it is basically a combination of all the different types of reactions that are taking place inside the living bodies. So, whatever we are performing right now, whatever we are doing right now, that is all because of the different metabolic reactions that are taking place inside the body. For example, I'm speaking right now, I'm moving my hands, or probably you are just listening to me, or probably you are just holding your pen and writing something. Everything is because of the metabolic reactions that are taking place inside the body. Now, if we try to look into the major components of metabolism, we come up with two different names. One is catabolism and the other one is anabolism. So, when I talk about catabolism, catabolism is basically the component of metabolism which is involved in the degradative processes, which means that all the reactions of the body which are involved in breaking down the energy rich complex molecules into smaller molecules, those reactions are categorized under catabolism. For example, let's just imagine that there is this bigger molecule. Now, some catabolic reactions will take place on it and it will be converted into some smaller molecules. Now, what is the importance of catabolism, or what is the importance of catabolic reactions? So, basically, these reactions primarily are involved in the release of energy. So, let's just take the example of food. So, we perform a lot of functions in day to day life. For that, we need energy. From where that energy is coming? That energy is coming from the food that we eat. So, whatever the food we are eating, after a lot of chemical reactions that take place on it, it is converted into glucose through various catabolic reactions, and that glucose is then again underwent it again undergoes a catabolic reaction or a pathway which is known as glycolysis, and a lot of energy is released, and that is the energy which we are consuming. So, similarly, in our body, also, when the cells are forming or a lot of different things are happening inside the body for the proper functioning, a lot of reactions need to take place which require energy. And that energy primarily comes from the catabolism of different molecules, where bigger molecules, which are energy dense, which contain a lot of energy stored inside them, they are broken down and the energy is released. And we will be talking about these processes, these molecules, these pathways in the coming lectures for sure. But because this is just the introductory lecture where I'm going to tell you about the different terminologies that we use, and just to make a foundation of all that stuff. So, catabolism is basically the degradative processes. On the other hand side, the term anabolism basically is involving the biosynthetic reactions. Now, what is the meaning of that? Biosynthesis means production of something, synthesis of biological compounds. So basically, the smaller molecules are converted into bigger energy rich molecules. So let's just try to reverse this whole thing. So let's suppose that we have two smaller molecules, and now by the use of energy, it will be converted into a bigger molecule, which now stores the energy, right? So, catabolism and anabolism are the two major components of metabolism, and they both are opposite of each other. Wherein the catabolic processes are involved in the degradation of molecules for the production of energy, basically the ATP and NADPH molecules. And on the other hand side, the anabolism is involved in the production of energy rich molecules by the consumption of energy. And they are also called as the biosynthetic reactions. Now, let's see another term, which is metabolic pathway. Now, because you are reading this subject, whatever the subject you are reading, where you have been introduced with the term metabolism, you might have also heard about metabolic pathway. Now, what exactly is a pathway? So when I talk about pathway is basically series of reactions that are taking place. So under metabolism, there are a lot of different pathways that take place, which we are going to cover in the coming slides. And these pathways are the series of reactions. For example, let's suppose that there is this one specific molecule A. This molecule is acted upon by an enzyme and it gets converted into B and subsequently to C, D, and let's say the final product is E. So from A to E, where A is the initial precursor molecule and E is the final product. Now, this reaction of A to E didn't happen in just one reaction. You see that A is converting into E not directly, but via a series of reactions, where first A is converted into B, then B to C, C to D, and then D to E, that is the final product. So, the reactions which take place in such a series kind of fashion, that collectively is known as the metabolic pathway. Now, let's move forward and talk about the other things. So let's see that what exactly the different pathways are. So you might have already studied about the different macromolecules like carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, and nucleic acids. So in this slide, we are able to understand that polysaccharides, basically, these are the complex carbohydrates. They are broken down via the catabolic processes and they are converted into smaller molecules, monosaccharides. You see that, right? So polysaccharides are bigger polymers and they are converted into individual monosaccharides. So this is what happens when catabolic reactions are taking place on the polysaccharides. Similarly, if we talk about the lipids, they are converted into smaller molecules, the fatty acids and glycerol, which are basically the foundation molecules, or you can say the primary molecules that are involved in the making of the complex lipids. And also, if we talk about the proteins, these are the polymers of amino acids. So proteins, they contain a lot of amino acids bonded together like this. And when catabolic processes take place on the proteins, they are converted into the individual amino acids. Now, this is very interesting what I'm going to tell you now. So, monosaccharides, these fatty acids, and the amino acids, they all, after certain reactions on them, again, those reactions are also a part of metabolism, they all collectively get converted into acetyl CoA. Now, this is a very important molecule. This acetyl CoA molecule is a very, very important molecule that is responsible for carrying out the citric acid cycle. Now, citric acid cycle, which is also known as TCA cycle, tricarboxylic acid cycle, or you can also call it as Krebs cycle. So this cycle is basically producing a lot of energy in the form of ATPs after series of reactions. Again, this is a metabolic pathway. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that metabolism involves different macronutrients, different macromolecules like the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the lipids. And it involves different reactions that are responsible for breaking down the complex molecules. And it also involves biosynthesis of the complex molecules from simpler molecules. So whatever happens, if I talk about specifically the catabolism here, the polysaccharides, lipids, and the proteins, they are broken down by the process of catabolism into their individual components. And then those are further converted into acetyl CoA. And this molecule further gains entry into the citric acid cycle. And this cycle is responsible for producing a lot of ATPs. And this ATP is the energy molecule. So we get a lot of energy from this thing. Now, let's try to understand that what exactly are these major metabolic pathways for the major macronutrients. Okay, so if we talk about the carbohydrate metabolism, the primary pathways that are involved include glycolysis. Now, this glycolysis is also known as Embden-Meyerhof pathway. So glycolysis is the primary pathway that is responsible for the production of ATPs. So this is the first pathway which acts on the glucose for the production of energy. And at the end of this pathway, acetyl-CoA pyruvate is produced, that pyruvate gets converted into acetyl-CoA, and that acetyl-CoA then enters into the Krebs cycle for the production of more energy. So glycolysis happens. At the end of the glycolysis, again, next pathway starts, that is citric acid cycle. So if I talk about glycolysis alone, this is the process of oxidation of glucose to pyruvate. Now, this pyruvate gets converted into acetyl-CoA under aerobic conditions, and that acetyl-CoA then enters into the Krebs cycle for the production of more energy. So you can say that citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle is the oxidation of acetyl-CoA, and after the oxidation, the so formed products involve carbon dioxide and water. Now, this glycolysis takes place in the cytosomal fraction of the cell. This is very important. And if we talk about the citric acid cycle, this thing happens in the mitochondria. So all the enzymes that are involved in the citric acid cycle, they are present in the mitochondrial matrix. Now, let's talk about gluconeogenesis. Now, gluconeogenesis is basically the process of synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate precursors. So if we have non-carbohydrate precursors, such as amino acids or glycerol, from these non-carbohydrate precursors, when glucose is formed, that process is known as gluconeogenesis. And this process, this pathway of gluconeogenesis takes place in the cytosol. Talking about glycogenesis, now glycogenesis is basically the formation of glycogen from glucose. So when we have ample amount of glucose present in the body, that glucose is converted into glycogen. So basically you can say that glycogen is a polymer of glucose. So different glucose molecules, they are joined together and they are formed into glycogen and then stored in the liver in the human body. And also this process happens in the cytosol. Talking about glycogenolysis, this is the opposite pathway of glycogenesis. So this basically involves the breakdown of this stored glycogen into glucose. So this glycogen, which was stored in the glycogenesis process, when this is broken down for the release of energy, the glucose is formed. Now, let's just try to understand the relation of anabolism and catabolism with these processes. And let's just take the example of glycogenesis and glycogenolysis here. In the previous slide, I told you about the anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism basically involves the production of molecules, high energy molecules, and catabolism involves the breakdown of molecules for the production of energy. So glycogenesis, think about it. Glycogenesis, is it a catabolic pathway or an anabolic pathway? I would suggest you to write that down in the comment box and also tell me that what is glycogenolysis? Is it a catabolic pathway or an anabolic pathway? Okay, now let's move on. There are other pathways as well that are related to carbohydrate metabolism, but I have just tried to elaborate on some of the important ones. Let's move on to the next category, that is the lipid metabolism. So lipid metabolism basically involves, just ignore these last three. These are not a part of the lipid metabolism. These are in the carbohydrate metabolism only. So the two important pathways of the lipid metabolism involve fatty acid oxidation and biosynthesis of fatty acids. So fatty acid oxidation is basically a catabolic process where larger or bigger or longer fatty acids, they are broken down into smaller molecules. So how these longer or bigger fatty acid molecules are broken down? These are broken down by the sequential removal of two carbon atoms. And these two carbon atoms are released in the form of acetyl-CoA. For example, let's suppose that we have, hypothetically, let's assume that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Let's suppose we have a fatty acid of 10 carbon atoms. So after one cycle of beta oxidation will take place, what will happen? We will get two components, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we will have 8 carbon atoms long fatty acid, and along with that, we will have 2 carbon atoms removed from this chain. So basically, 2 carbon atoms are being removed after one cycle of fatty acid oxidation, or you can call it as beta oxidation. Now, this 2 carbon that is being reduced is the acetyl-CoA. Now, you remember in the first slide, I told you that this acetyl-CoA that is so produced, it enters into the Krebs cycle and produces energy. And on the other hand side, if we talk about the biosynthesis of fatty acids, so these are the reactions that take place. This is the pathway that happens when the carbohydrates and the amino acids are consumed in excess. So the body starts to form the fatty acids and store it in the form of triacylglycerols. So this is an anabolic pathway. Now let's move on. So talking about the amino acids, now you know that there are 20 standard amino acids present in the body and which are responsible for the formation of proteins, which are an integral part of the cell. And also it performs variety of functions in the body. So all these amino acids, they have their individual metabolic pathways, and they have anabolic pathway and the catabolic pathway. For example, let's just assume we have a amino acid tryptophan. So tryptophan amino acid will be having one anabolic pathway related to it and one catabolic pathway. And similarly, all the amino acids are having catabolic and anabolic pathways individual to them. And lastly, we have the nucleic acid metabolism. So nucleic acids, they are very important. They are also involved in forming the genetic material of the body. So there are two types of nucleic acids that we have been studying about. One is the purines and one is the pyrimidines. So talking about the purines, they have two different types of pathways associated with them. One that are involved in the biosynthesis and one that are involved in the degradation. So there are separate metabolic pathways that are involved in the breakdown of the purine molecules. And then on the other hand side, there are separate metabolic pathways that are involved in the formation of these purine molecules. And the same thing applies to the pyrimidines as well. So this was about the overview of the metabolic pathways, where we try to understand that what exactly metabolism is, what are the components, and what metabolic pathways are, and what are the major pathways of individual macromolecules. So we will be covering these pathways in the coming lectures. Thank you.